Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. It is indeed that time of week again, folks. It is DCB's weekly college football recap, and it is the day after college football conference championship games just wrapped up. If you were in our space on Saturday morning or even on Friday, we had a very profitable weekend, both in college football and college basketball. So hopefully you were able to join us over there or even just listen to this podcast last week as we gave out most of our picks for the college football title games. Varying degrees of confidence for each of these picks, of course, and our two big ones on Saturday both came home in a major way. Georgia dominates Alabama, and Indiana squeaks out the win against Ohio State. We will recap all of these games and more. But the first thing that I want to get into is a continuation of a segment that we did on last week's podcast, and that is another update to some of the coaching moves that have been happening around the sport. A lot of the bigger jobs were filled last week, but obviously some of those opened up some new positions at smaller schools, and so we've got another big update in terms of some moves. The big headliner, in my opinion, is Matt Campbell going to Penn State. I've seen very mixed reactions on this. There's been a fair amount of negativity surrounding this Penn State coaching search in general. It seems like they struck out on their first few candidates. But if Matt Campbell is your safety coach, that is a great option to have. They signed him to an 8-year deal. I think he's one of the best program builders in the sport. He obviously doesn't have a ton of major accomplishments at Iowa State, but we have to keep things in perspective when we're talking about this sport. Not everyone has all of the same access to resources and other things, so he's done what he can with what's available at Iowa State and more. Probably the most successful coach in their school's history. So in my opinion, this is a great move for Penn State. It may take him a year to get going and get his culture established, but I think they will be very good long term, and ultimately this could be an upgrade for James Franklin, something that people didn't necessarily think was possible over the last few days for Penn State, given some of the other guys that they were not able to sign. Speaking of Iowa State, I love the way that they approached this. They made it very clear that they held no ill will towards Campbell. They understood that this was a business move, and he's been there for a decade, so it's been a win-win both for the university and for himself. They also quickly moved to replace him, hiring Jimmy Rogers from Washington State, another Washington State coach leaving after a short period of time up there. Again, I think this is a pretty good hire. We'll see how much he can do. Matt Campbell set a very high standard at Iowa State that had previously not been expected of them. So we'll see if Rodgers can continue to build upon that winning culture in Ames. The Cal job was filled by Oregon defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoy. Very interesting hire here. Pretty young guy. He seems to be a very good recruiter. And he has already gotten their 5-star quarterback, who was a freshman this past season, to commit to staying for another season. So a very positive start over there. We'll see if they can actually turn into a credible recruiting operation in the ACC. Very unique geographical perspective from there, being on the West Coast against a bunch of Atlantic Coast teams, given that's the conference that they're in. Doesn't make a lot of sense as far as the travel for their games, but it might give them an advantage as far as recruiting goes. The other Oregon coordinator, OC Will Stein, goes to Kentucky to be their next head coach. He is a Kentucky man, grew up in the state, and is one of the best young offensive minds in the sport, in my opinion. The Dan Lanning coaching tree is expanding already. I think this is another quality hire for Kentucky. Mark Stoops, he had run his course. He had a great first few seasons there, and again, similar to Matt Campbell, really had elevated expectations at Kentucky to a level that we hadn't seen before. It is incredibly difficult to win in the SEC, especially at a program like Kentucky. So Stein has his hands full with this program, but if he can just make a bowl each season, that should be good enough theoretically. I know it's not necessarily what Kentucky fans would want to hear, but relatively speaking, that is the expectation for that program in the SEC. How about a guy leaving the SEC to take a job in the Big 12? Texas A&M offensive coordinator Colin Klein goes back to his alma mater in Kansas State to be their head coach. Kind of surprising to see Chris Kleiman step down and retire, but it was definitely not his best job this year, and maybe he saw the writing on the wall. Kleiman's teams at Kansas State prior to this year were always some of the best coached in the country, and I know that Klein has a lot of love for this university, so I would expect them to get right back to their 8 or 9 win standard next season. We've seen nearly every successful group of 5 team this year lose their coach to a power conference, and now that those jobs have been open, some of them have started to fill up again. Neil Brown gets hired at North Texas, another home run down there in Denton. They've got money to spend, and I think they spent it wisely here. Brown was an excellent coach in the group of 5 before going to West Virginia, had a bit of a rocky road over there, up and down seasons, and not a great one in his final year there, but I think he will once again find success at a lower level. Billy Napier, the fired Florida coach, ends up at James Madison, and once again, he is back in the Sun Belt. This is another guy who previously has had a ton of success in the group of 5, previously at Louisiana. James Madison is a great program to be stepping into. He'll have a lot of resources available to him, and hopefully some of the players that are on this current team who will be competing in the college football playoffs. Napier's play calling at Florida was a major issue, so maybe the book is out on his offense, but regardless, this seems like a good hire on the surface for James Madison. South Florida hired Ohio State offensive coordinator Brian Hartline. I've seen a lot of butthurt Buckeye fans about this due to their offensive performance in the Big Ten championship game. They think that he is distracted from that. He has been spending some time down there in Tampa, but what do you realistically want these guys to do? They're in an impossible situation. They have to take the new job before they're finished with their old job. I wouldn't blame Ohio State if they wanted to say they don't want him to call plays in the playoffs. I don't think that's going to happen, though, so for now, he's still walking that tightrope. He seems highly motivated down there, and he seems like a good speaker as a head coach. I don't know too much about his ability to handle a program overall, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. We know he can run a very successful offense, and that is the staple of the South Florida program as it is. Jason Candle, the Toledo head coach, he's been there a very long time, and probably for good reason, but he decided to take a new job here and go to UConn. Another surprise opening there after Jim Mora Jr. went to Colorado State. This is honestly more of a tough look for Toledo, in my opinion. I'm not really sure that this is a huge upgrade and job for Candle. Also not really sure if UConn is going to be happy with their decision in a couple of years, but best of luck to him there regardless. Charles Huff goes to Memphis. This was another kind of surprising move to me. He made the move last year going from Marshall, where he won the Sun Belt, over to Southern Miss, and he took almost his entire roster with him, leading you to believe that maybe that was the first step in actually building something down there, but just like that, he's once again out the door, and he's got the Memphis job. So definitely a big upgrade for him personally, and I guess probably hard to pass up given that opportunity. Memphis has been underachieving the past few years, even though they have the best resources in the AAC, so we'll see if Huff can harness those resources and turn them into a little bit better production on the field. Tulane in the American is the one team that did not go outside of their own staff to find a new head coach. John Summerall is moving on, but Tulane is hiring their pass coordinator, Will Hall. He previously went 1-11 with Southern Miss as a head coach the previous year, so he gets another shot here, and I'm sure we'll be hungry for redemption. I've seen a lot of people spotlighting that year specifically of his career, but he's had success at other places, so potentially a nice bounce back story there for him. And last coaching news before we get into the recap of the conference championship games this past weekend. Just a couple of interim coaches that are promoted to full-time head coach now. First is Alex Mortensen down at UAB. Pulled off a couple of big wins, including against the aforementioned Memphis late in the season. Did a lot better than Trent Dilfer before he was fired, so Mortensen certainly earned himself the job here. And then Mark Carney as well, another interim coach, this one at Kent State. We talked about them a little bit on last week's pod. Finishing 5-7 for them is a huge accomplishment given how many times they had struggled to even get a single win in the previous 5 years. So Carney, once again, well-deserved getting promoted from interim there. All right, let's get into these conference championship results. It was kind of nice of the networks to put these in order for me, starting with the group of 5 and then all of the power conference games on Saturday. But we had 4 games on Friday. First up was Conference USA, Kennesaw State and Jacksonville State. This game was pure and utter chaos from start to finish. Jacksonville State had 3 long drives in the first 3 quarters, and none of them resulted in points. They threw a red zone interception in the first quarter. They got stopped on downs deep in Kennesaw territory in the second quarter, and then they missed a short field goal in the third quarter, leaving them scoreless heading into the fourth quarter. Kennesaw during this time only able to put up 10 points of their own, and they were also stopped on downs deep in Jacksonville State territory to end the third quarter. Their defense took advantage of that position that they put the Gamecocks in by forcing a safety, putting them up 12-0. But on the ensuing safety return kick, they fumbled the ball, setting up Jacksonville State's first points of the game. After forcing a 3-and-out, the Gamecocks went down and quickly took the lead and converted a 2-point conversion, going up 15-12. As a Kennesaw backer, I could not believe how quickly they just melted down in a matter of about 5 minutes. But they then responded incredibly well, scoring a touchdown going down the field very methodically to take the lead. Their defense got a final stop, and they held on. What a season for Kennesaw State. The Owls finished 10-3 in just their second year in Division I. Over in the Sun Belt, I think we all knew what was about to happen when James Madison took on Troy. Troy did keep this game competitive for longer than I expected. They scored 2 touchdowns in the second quarter, but otherwise really not able to generate any type of offense against that elite James Madison defense. Troy was held to just 4 for 20 on third and fourth down combined. They had 177 total yards in the game, including -26 on the ground. James Madison's defensive line has been very, very good all season, and we will talk about them more when we break down the college football playoffs. 2 more games on Friday started about an hour later. The first one, very unfortunate for our future bets in the offseason. The Mean Green of North Texas go down swinging. They lost to Tulane 34-21 in the American title game. They did outgain them in total yardage, and they had their chances throughout the game, but silly penalties and 5 turnovers ultimately cost them in this one. Didn't force a single one by Tulane, so that Green Wave offense did just enough, exactly what they needed to, and really just let North Texas beat themselves, as sad as it was to say. Stud freshman running back Caleb Hawkins also went down with an injury in the first quarter for North Texas. He's had an incredible season, rushing for over 1,200 yards and 23 touchdowns, but they really didn't get much out of him in this one. Congrats to Tulane, another playoff participant from the G5. And the final game of Friday night, the Mountain West Championship game, another one that I thought was pretty straightforward, and we nailed this one. Boise State just owned them from start to finish, 38-21. They went up 21-0 and really never looked back. Their defense was, I thought, pretty dominant throughout. The box score says otherwise, but the eye test tells me that the Boise defense did what they needed to do. The play was UNLV team total under, but any way that you got involved with Boise in this one, you cashed. We had one group of 5 game on Saturday, and I had boots on ground for this one between Miami of Ohio and Western Michigan. Wasn't exactly the most thrilling result. Western wins 23-13. There were some explosive plays in the first quarter, but once things settled down a little more, the defenses really just controlled things on both sides. Western was able to run the ball a little bit better for 5.1 yards per carry. They ran it 56 times as opposed to just 13 pass attempts. That's been their game plan all year, and it's been mostly based around the quarterback run. He runs it 23 times in this one for just 65 yards. But Western Michigan, congrats on the MAC title. In the afternoon on Saturday, we saw the SEC championship game, and normally this is a great battle between these two teams, Georgia and Alabama. In fact, now one of these two has won the SEC 11 of the past 12 years. The only exception was 2019 LSU, so it really took a super team to beat either one of these to win the league. But in this specific game, Georgia just took it to Alabama all game long, dominated the line of scrimmage, especially defensively, holding Alabama to -6 yards on the ground. I thought Georgia's offense was once again pretty average. Gunnar Stockton didn't really push the ball downfield too much. They ran it for about 3.4 yards per carry. But this one, I thought, meant a little bit more to Georgia. They needed to break that streak of losses to Alabama, but this is twice now that Kirby Smart has played them in a rematch, and he's 2-0 in those spots, 0-7 in the other matchups. The Big Ten Championship was an incredible defensive display on both sides, especially in the red zone by Indiana. They come away with the win, 13-10, an unbelievable 2-year turnaround by their coach, Curt Cignetti, and of course, all the players on that team. But the red zone defense, Ohio State's final 2 drives. First, they go 12 plays, 70 yards in almost 7 minutes, and then get stopped on 4th and 1 at the Indiana 5. The other drive was 15 plays, 81 yards for almost 8 minutes. And this one is the one that you're probably seeing all over your TV this morning. The missed field goal. 27 yards missed by Jaden Fielding at Ohio State. We've seen this before in big moments, but as much as the kid's got to make the kick, I blame Ryan Day in this situation. You have to go for it again on 4th and 1 in that position. I don't care that you could potentially tie the game here. Your team is bigger and stronger and more athletic than anyone in the country, and you should trust that your matchups can win in that position, especially after they failed the previous attempt. You got to have another play drawn up there. It's really felt like all season long, Ohio State has been holding back with this offense, and I'm not sure if it's because they don't fully trust Julian Sand throwing it downfield or reading coverages, or if Ryan Day is just too conservative of a coach, but they really need to get their receivers the ball a lot more in the playoffs if they want to take full advantage of the mismatches that those guys give them. Their defense held Indiana to the fewest points they've scored in a win in 2 seasons under Curt Cignetti. But again, the offense could not finish drives. Sand threw another interception early on in the first quarter, and Indiana just found a way to win this one. Not super effective in the ground game, but one second half touchdown drive was all that offense needed to win this game outright. Huge for the Indiana program, and honestly puts them in a worse position in the playoffs. As I said last week, I thought Ohio State would have been better off losing this game, and that's exactly what happened. We'll see if they can respond in the playoffs just like they did last year. And the final game of the recap for this week is going to be the ACC championship game. I considered talking about this one before the two heavy hitters, the SEC and the Big Ten, but this was honestly the best game of the night. If you watched it, it went to overtime and Duke wins it 27-20. The nightmare situation for the ACC played out, and you had a 5-loss conference champion. The level of ball control offense that both teams were able to show in this one were incredibly impressive. Duke opened the game by scoring a touchdown on a 9-minute, 38-second possession from their own 25-yard line, just went 15 plays slowly down the field and punched it in. They also had an 8-minute drive to start the second quarter that also went 75 yards. Virginia had a 17-play drive in the third quarter that ended in a field goal and a 96-yard drive in just 1 minute and 22 seconds to tie the game near the end of the fourth quarter and send it to OT. Once again, the over did not quite come home for us in this matchup, just like the first time these two teams played. And I think that is the biggest reason why. Both offenses were very effective in this game, but the ball control was incredible. Duke scores a touchdown in overtime, and their defense ends it with an interception on Virginia's first offensive snap. It honestly would have been fun to see this Duke offense in the playoffs, but they clearly did not deserve it with 5 losses, so congrats to the two G5 bids, and funny that the ACC champion did get left out, although I will say I think that had a big impact on what we're about to talk about next. All right, so we're going to get into the preview section of this podcast, starting with Army and Navy, and also going through all of the bowl games, including the college football playoff. But before we do that, I want to kind of look back at what we talked about last week. We projected the field. I gave you guys my predictions for all the games and then applied them to how I thought the field would look, and we got a lot of things right. I expected Indiana to win and be the number 1 seed. I expected Georgia to win and that the Alabama loss would not remove them from the field. Saw a lot of people suggest that they would be kicked out of the playoff after losing so handily to Georgia, but realistically their resume was way too good to be outside looking in. However, the one thing that I got seriously wrong was I thought that Notre Dame would remain in the playoff field. I thought that their overall resume was just better than Miami's and that the head-to-head was a secondary consideration. I bet on Notre Dame to win the national championship, and I would have backed that claim if they had made it into the field. That's what's so crazy about this decision, not necessarily putting Miami in over them because of the head-to-head. That does make some sense. But you now have a 12-team field, and even with this expansion, you now have potentially the best team in the country not in the bracket. If I was a more conspiratorial man, I would say it was almost intentionally done that way so that we could have more expansion for this playoff. But however it came to make that decision, it is wild that Notre Dame will not be in this playoffs. The way that they're playing right now, I genuinely would have picked them to beat anybody else in the country. Nearly every team has some flaws, but to me, they are the most balanced in the way that they were playing the second half of the year. So I can't really blame them for their decision to opt out of a bowl game entirely. I'm normally the last person to defend Notre Dame, but once again, it's just hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that potentially the best team in the country does not get to compete for a national championship, even though we now have 12 teams. I'd be very curious to hear what my listeners think of the whole Notre Dame, Alabama, Miami debate for that final at-large spot, so please throw those down in the comments below on whatever platform that you're listening to, and of course, subscribe if you haven't already. But let's get into the preview. I want to start with Army and Navy. This game kind of gets overlooked sometimes, but it is a regular season game following the conference championship weekend. And there is one play that I have circled for this matchup. You play it every single year and you really don't think twice about it. It's the under. It's a historical trend that's going to continue between these two teams. They're the two teams that run the ball more than anyone in the country, which obviously chews off a lot of the clock. They're incredibly familiar with one another, not just their players, but also their systems, so they know how to game plan for one another. The spread is very short considering how these two teams have performed on the season. Navy was an American title contender, and Army is just 6-5 with a loss to an FCS school the season after winning the league. And yet the number is just -6 for Navy. So again, it's going to be difficult for them to create margin, even though they're the better team. Give me the under 38.5. All right, time to get into the preview section of this pod. I'm going to go through every single bowl game and at least mention them. There's some that I probably won't have too many thoughts about, but the first thought that I want to give generally about all of these is we have to remember there is a high risk of opt-outs here, not just for players, but also potentially for some coaches that have taken new jobs or coordinators. So be sure to keep an eye out for those news before placing a bet on any of these games. I will have a couple of bets for you guys to lock in, and I have specifically targeted games that I think there's a pretty low risk of a ton of opt-outs. But again, just want to throw that caution in there for bowl games. There's always the chance that your starting quarterback all of a sudden isn't playing and the line moves 10 points against you. So play with caution, check the news before you place your bets. Here we go, bowl games one after the next. Starting with the Veterans Bowl. This will be played on Tuesday, December 16th. So getting started a little early this year. This will just be a week after I drop this podcast. And we've got two conference championship game losers right here with Troy and Jacksonville State. Representatives from the Sun Belt and Conference USA generally give the big edge to the Sun Belt when those conferences match up. So slight lean to Troy -4. Nothing really too strong in that one though. Next is the Cure Bowl, and that one is the next day on Wednesday the 17th. This should be a great matchup, and I am going to lock in a bet here. It's Old Dominion and South Florida. I like this game to turn into a shootout. I think Byron Brown should be playing the quarterback for the Bulls. I believe this will be his last time showing up in a Bulls uniform. Again, could be wrong on that. If he decides not to play, this could be rough and we'll get a bad number. But either way, this is a very high-tempo offense for USF, and Old Dominion can really put up some points themselves as well. So over 55.5 between those two teams. One more game on that Wednesday night is the 68 Ventures Bowl. The names just get worse and worse every year, guys, but I am going to read them out. Louisiana against Delaware. This is one I really have a hard time getting to the window on anything. Delaware probably has a little bit more motivation given that it's their first year in Division I. Louisiana did finish their season pretty strong, though, with 4 straight wins to get to this point. It's pretty much a coin flip here. One game the next day on Thursday, the 18th. This is the Xbox Bowl, I guess, between Missouri State and Arkansas State. A pretty local game, kind of a rivalry, I guess. Potential similar motivation edge here for Missouri State, just like with Delaware. This is their first year in Division I. Slight lean to them, I guess. Arkansas State's defense has been pretty rough all year, so give me the new team to D1. Couple of games on that Friday the 19th, and they're both early kickoffs. The first one is at 11 a.m. This is the Myrtle Beach Bowl, and that's actually a pretty decent matchup. between two Group of Five champions, Kennesaw State, the winners of the Conference USA, and Western Michigan, the winners of the MAC. I like the under in this game, 49.5. Nice football number, under 7 touchdowns there. Two teams that love to run the ball, as I talked about earlier with Western. Kennesaw did try to sling it a little bit more, but found more success on the ground in their title game. Just expecting a lot of clock to come off on these drives, just as we saw in that ACC game. This really should be a Group of Five playoff game, though. Let's get a separate bracket going for those teams so that their postseason matchups actually mean something. And the second game on that Friday will kick off at 2:30 p.m. This is the Gasparilla Bowl between Memphis and North Carolina State. Expecting some opt-outs here for Memphis. The line shifted very quickly from +2.5 open for NC State up to -5.5. To me, that tells me I'm not expecting many players there for Memphis. They just hired a new coach in Charles Huff. He just absolutely cleaned house at Southern Miss last year, so maybe he'll do that again here at Memphis. NC State finished 7-5, a little bit of a weird year for them. Their offense has been good all year, defense a disaster. So if they can score some points, they give themselves a chance every game. I'm not really sure what to expect from Memphis, so I'm staying away from this one. The following Monday, we have the Idaho Potato Bowl. I'm very glad that this one has maintained its name over the years. We've got two West Coast teams playing between Washington State and Utah State. Washington State, as we discussed earlier, has lost their coach, Jimmy Rogers. These are two 6-6 teams, so not the highest levels of competition. Obviously, Wazoo has played up to the competition against the best teams on their schedule, but they also lost to Oregon State, so been very unpredictable. Utah State's been a major overachiever this year in year one under Bronco Mendenhall. They've got a fun offense, so maybe this will actually be a decent game to watch. Not sure if I'm going to have a bet on it, though. 3 games on Tuesday, 2 days before Christmas, on the 23rd of December. The Boca Raton Bowl will kick us off that day at 2 p.m. between Toledo and Louisville. Pretty big spread on this one. Louisville favored by almost 10 points. However, this Toledo defense, as we've discussed all season on the podcast, is very, very good. They're top 10 in most metrics, top 20 in the others. I like the under in this game. I think their defense will make this much more competitive than expected. Louisville has been very up and down the second half of the year. They've dealt with some injuries at all different positions. Specifically, their running back, Isaac Brown, has been out, and I don't expect him to rush back for this matchup. So give me the under 46.5. Second game of the day is at 5:30. This is the New Orleans Bowl between Western Kentucky and Southern Miss. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. Southern Miss, as we just talked about, they lost their coach, Charles Huff, so maybe slight lean to the Hilltoppers for that reason. Probably a lot of news to watch for this one if you want to bet it. And the third and final game of the night is the Frisco Bowl between Ohio and UNLV. I definitely want to see if Parker Navarro is going to play for Ohio at quarterback. He had some injuries that were starting to pick up towards the end of the regular season, but I know that he would love to go out there one more time. Actually, he may have one more year of eligibility. I guess I have to check that. But either way, I want to see if he plays before placing a bet on this game. I do lean Ohio plus 4.5. If he does take the field, UNLV has been one of the regression targets we've had circled all year. Faded him against Boise, and that worked out. So I would go right back to the well here. Again, if Parker Navarro plays for Ohio. One game on Christmas Eve, and it's at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, but this will be a 3 p.m. local kick as it is the Hawaii Bowl. You've got Hawaii playing in the game, facing off against California, who has a Hawaiian quarterback back home, and he's got a lot of guys going back with him. It sounds like should be some Cal fans in the stands for this one, and their offense should I think, thrive in this game. I like the over between these two teams, once again up there at 55.5. Very similar to the South Florida Old Dominion number that we locked in earlier. I'm just expecting a nice performance out of JKS. He's confirmed that he's coming back for year 2 for Cal. Micah Alejado, and the offense for Hawaii is also very fun and explosive. So points, points, points in this one. No games on Christmas, but one the following day on Friday, and another one that I'll probably have boots on ground for. This is the Game Above Sports Bowl. It is in Detroit. The sponsor for this one has changed a bunch of times, but the location stays the same at Ford Field in Detroit. We've got Central Michigan and Northwestern. You typically have a MAC school play in this game. However, the spread on this one is not very inspiring. Northwestern is favored by 12.5, suggesting that we may not get a very good game here. Total's also pretty low at 44.5. I would really struggle to see how Central Michigan is going to score against that Northwestern defense. They love to run the ball, and Northwestern loves to stop the run. So CMU is going to have to find another way. Not sure if they'll be able to. I believe I just said that there was one game on Friday, but I was mistaken. We've got a couple more kicking off that day. At 4:30, we've got the Rate Bowl between New Mexico and Minnesota. I definitely am going to get involved with New Mexico here. There's +3 out there right now as far as the spread. Anything over a field goal is great here. Motivation advantage, big time for New Mexico. They've had a really nice season out in the Mountain West. And they also got screwed out of playing in their conference title game. They beat UNLV head-to-head, but because of a computer tiebreaker scenario, they were not in the game. So this is their only opportunity to play in the postseason. I absolutely expect them to win this game outright. Jason Eck, their head coach, one of the most creative play callers in the sport. We'll see who ends up inevitably poaching him from that school in the coming years. The third and final game of the day, the First Responder Bowl between Florida International and UTSA. I have absolutely nothing to say about this one, guys. UTSA has some offensive weapons. If they play, they will roll. If they don't play, this game will be weird. I don't have anything else to say about it. Looks like we've got a pretty full slate on that Saturday following Christmas. No surprise there. Starting with the Military Bowl. This one kicks off at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so a very early kick, but two East Coast teams, so no problem here between Pitt and East Carolina. I saw one projection earlier today that had this as the tightest margin game of the entire bowl season in their projections, and I kind of agree with that. I think this should be a very entertaining and competitive game. Pittsburgh has been very erratic. They have been able to kind of beat up on teams that they are more athletic than, but East Carolina presents a pretty decent profile defensively, especially for an American school. Their offense has big play capability, and they play with tempo, something that Pitt hasn't seen a ton of. This game could get real wild. I lean towards the over, but I also like East Carolina plus the 6. I think this game will be very close. At noon, we've got the Pinstripe Bowl between Penn State and Clemson, and this is just an unbelievably fitting matchup. These two teams were meant to play each other, the two biggest underachievers of the season. Clemson, the clear ACC favorite in the preseason, and didn't even make it close to the conference title game. Penn State, similar situation in the Big Ten. They were right up there with Ohio State in terms of favorites to win the Big Ten. National title contender, I thought so anyway. Did not have the season they were expecting. We'll see which team shows up more motivated to play here. Next on the Saturday slate is the Fenway Bowl, UConn versus Army. Again, not a ton to say about this one. UConn, not in a great situation ever since Jim Mora left. It looks like the line is moving strongly against them, so maybe not great vibes with UConn moving forward. We'll have to see how Army looks against Navy this weekend. Next is the Pop-Tarts Bowl, and this one is always fun. There's the big spectacle with the giant Pop-Tart going in the toaster, and the players get to eat actual Pop-Tarts after the game, I believe. But the matchup on the field should also be awesome between Georgia Tech and BYU. We just saw BYU struggle tremendously on offense in the Big 12 title game. Georgia Tech's defense, though, is the defense that you want to see when your offense needs to get right. Both of these teams have really been kind of overachievers relative to how they've performed in some of their games, especially early on in the season. Georgia Tech squeaked by a lot of their opponents. Either way, I think this is going to be a pure chaotic game. Really good play callers on both sides, even though Buster Faulkner for Georgia Tech did just get hired as the OC at Florida. If he is going to coach in this bowl game, I lean towards the over 55.5. If he doesn't, I may stay off of this one and just root for chaos. Next up is the Arizona Bowl. And again, this is two group of five schools that I don't really know how much we can really expect from. Miami, Ohio already had their starting quarterback opt out several weeks ago to prepare for the NFL draft. Fresno's offense really faltered down the stretch, so I guess a lean to the under 44.5 in this one, but one that I would wait to bet towards closer to kickoff. Over in the New Mexico Bowl, just one state over from the Arizona Bowl, we've got North Texas and San Diego State. I'm expecting a bunch of opt-outs for the Mean Green, including Drew Mestamaker, I would assume. The line has already moved from the Mean Green favored by 6.5 down to 4.5. I could see this getting way smaller or even flipping to San Diego State if the opt-outs do indeed occur for North Texas. Down in the Gator Bowl, we've got an SEC ACC matchup, and you might be surprised by this spread unless you've been following how big of a difference these conferences have. Virginia is a 7-point underdog to Missouri. Virginia has a much better record on the surface, but again, played a much weaker strength of schedule. Lean towards Missouri controlling this one with their defense. In the Texas Bowl, we've got a very interesting line for this game. Houston against LSU. You guys know that Houston has been one of my teams all year. We loved them in the preseason. It was our biggest future bet, was their win total over, and they finished 9-3. Not only that, they are a favorite here by 3 points against LSU. Part of that is it is the Texas Bowl. This is essentially a home game for them. But again, motivation is something that we really have to factor into these games. LSU definitely has the more talented roster, but are they going to be motivated to show up here? We just saw them in the second to last game of the season really not care about the Western Kentucky game at all. They won 13-10. It was an incredibly anemic performance on offense, as it has been for most of the season for them. I think Houston actually has an ability to score more than them in this one. So crazy to say that, maybe, but after watching these two teams play all year, I genuinely think that's the right side. So Houston -3 would be my play in that matchup. All right, a couple final bowl games to finish up here on the final week, and then we will dive into the playoffs. But we got to start on Monday, the 29th of December in the Birmingham Bowl. I don't have too much to say about this matchup between Georgia Southern and App State, but because of all of these opt-outs of 6-6 teams deciding not to participate in bowls, you've got a couple of 5-7 teams getting involved, and not only that, you've got a true rivalry game in this bowl. App State and Georgia Southern absolutely hate each other, so this should be an absolutely incredible matchup. I can't wait for this one. We've got a few games on December 30th. That's a Tuesday. The first one kicks off at 2 p.m. It's the Independence Bowl between Coastal Carolina and Louisiana Tech. Coastal lost their coach, and the line has moved against them. It's now +7.5. Really not looking to trust either one of these two teams. Coastal's gotten a nice boost down the stretch with their quarterback play. I would not be shocked if he opts out of this one, though. The other two games that day are certainly better matchups. We start in the Music City Bowl, where Tennessee is essentially playing a home game here against Illinois. That is the only reason why I would maybe stay off of the Illini in this spot. They're getting 5.5 points. It does kind of feel similar, though, to the matchup last season when Illinois faced South Carolina. That line was even bigger, so maybe the books are onto that connection. But Illinois, I think, should keep this game competitive given how weak Tennessee has been defensively. It's hard for me to see them create a ton of margin against a capable offense like Illinois, so lean to the underdog with the points. But again, this is basically a home game for Tennessee. And the final game of the night, Alamo Bowl, out west, USC and TCU. The only reason, once again, why I don't want to back USC in this spot, another basically home game for TCU. They've been very up and down this year. When they're down, they're really down. Josh Hoover is throwing multiple picks. They can't run the ball. They can't defend. When it all clicks, they look like a very good team, though. So really hard to guess which TCU team that we're going to get here. Also not sure about the motivation factor for USC. They've had a great season. If they maybe just won one more game, specifically the Oregon matchup late in the year, they could have made it to the playoffs, but sitting there at number 16, just on the outside, I'm not really sure how much they're going to get up for this matchup. We've got 4 games on New Year's Eve to talk about. This is a Wednesday this year. The first game is at noon. It's the ReliaQuest Bowl, and you've got a really interesting matchup between Iowa and Vanderbilt. Vandy's got arguably the best offense in the country right now. Iowa has one of the best defenses. Iowa can't score at all, but Vandy gives up a ton of explosive plays through the air. Something's got to give, and we will have to watch this game to find out what it is. Next up that day is the Sun Bowl between Arizona State and Duke, and this is a very, very tight line, even though Arizona State has the better record. We obviously just saw Duke win the ACC title as an 8-5 team. Arizona State will not have their starting quarterback, Sam Leavitt, but they haven't had him for weeks. Not sure how much of an impact that will have, despite it likely being the top talking point for this game. So lean Arizona State right now. A lot of news to watch for that one, potentially on some of the players on Duke's side as well. Heavyweight matchup over in the Citrus Bowl between Michigan and Texas. You know they had to be salivating over putting these two brands together on the field once again, just like we saw last year in the Big House, where Texas really took it to Michigan up front. I worry that that might happen again here, but we saw last year where Michigan was a huge underdog against Alabama in their bowl game, and they beat them outright. So clearly they can play with the SEC. This is a spot where I would love to see Michigan's offense let loose a little bit. They played extremely conservatively really all season, and specifically in the Ohio State game. You really got nothing to lose in this bowl game. Just let Bryce sling it around, try some new things, and have some fun. Go out there and beat Texas. And the final game of the day on New Year's Eve is the Las Vegas Bowl. And we have two power conference teams matching up here, but not very similar teams, in my opinion. Utah is a 14-point favorite against Nebraska. This is a nightmare matchup for the Cornhuskers. Their run defense has been a disaster. The second half of the year, they've gotten gashed by every team they've played, including most recently against both Penn State and Iowa. That's exactly what Utah does best. They run in all different ways. They're the best rushing team in all of the Power Four. They can do it with multiple different quarterbacks. Their backup will come in and break off an explosive run. They can throw jet sweeps at you. I just don't like this position at all for Nebraska. So lean Utah to completely dominate them. And once the lines for team totals come out, I'll be looking at that as a play. Utah team total over whatever that number is. All right, 4 more games to talk about. They're all on Friday, January 2nd. This will be the day after another round of playoff games, so I'm not expecting a lot of eyeballs on these games, but we could have some decent matchups. The first one is the Armed Forces Bowl at 1 p.m. between Rice and Texas State. I like the over in this game at 59.5. Texas State has one of the best offenses in the country. They have a fun freshman quarterback who can run around. They've got good receivers. They've got good running backs. They have a massive offensive line, but their defense has let them down all season long, and they're in for a tough matchup against a very unique Rice offense. We've talked about them a couple of times this season. They run a triple option, but out of the shotgun. Not sure Texas State will be too prepared for that. Give me the over between these two teams. Liberty Bowl at 4:30. This should be a really weird matchup. You've got Navy against Cincinnati. I'm not really sure how Cincinnati game plans for Navy here, so I guess slightly lean to them. This will be a completely different offense than anything Cincinnati has seen in the Big 12. They're not great at stopping the run, which is always the first thing you look at when handicapping a military academy game, so slightly into Navy. In the night slate, we've got the Duke's Mayo Bowl between Wake Forest and Mississippi State, two teams that have been among the most undervalued all season long. Mississippi State actually gets into this game as a 5-7 team. Wake Forest, though, finished 8-4 after being projected to be one of the bottom feeders in the league. Mississippi State is coming off an 0-12 season a year ago, so the fact that they are in a bowl, even at 5-7, big accomplishment, and both of these teams, I think, should continue to play motivated in this game. I hope more teams take that approach than what I'm expecting, but these two, I certainly do expect to show up and compete here. And the final bowl game that we'll talk about before jumping into the first round of the playoffs, the Holiday Bowl. It seems like Arizona, almost every time they make it to a bowl, they end up competing in this one specifically, and they will take on SMU in what should be a pretty good matchup. I've loved this Arizona team all year. We've been on them several times, and I'm going to go back to them one more time here, most likely. Again, going to wait to lock this one in, but I've just been much more impressed by what I've seen from them throughout the season. SMU, very inconsistent, so Arizona, at least a lean for now. All right, let's get into these first round playoff matchups. I'm sure some of you have been waiting around, or maybe you just skipped to this point of the podcast. Either way, welcome in or welcome back. And we've got 4 games to discuss. We'll talk about the G5 included matchups to begin with, and then we'll get into the 2 heavyweights. But we'll start with James Madison hitting the road to take on Oregon. This is the 5-12 matchup. Gotta love that these first round matchups are on school campus sites. The neutral sites are just not as great of atmospheres, so very excited to see Autzen Stadium host a game for the first time in the playoffs. However, I think James Madison is the right side in this one. As I kind of talked about earlier, their defense has been exceptional all year. They're allowing less than 250 total yards per game for the entire year, just 15 points per game. They've got some real athletes up front, and that is going to be the key here, obviously. Oregon has been running the ball relentlessly in the second half of the year, and it's paid off well for them. JMU has to be able to hold up just well enough against the run to have any chance to pull the outright upset here. I do worry a little bit about their offense. They're very reliant on big plays, specifically from their running back, Wayne Knight, but I love how much of a threat their QB is to run. Alonzo Barnett has 14 rushing scores on the year. Oregon has struggled in the pass game most of the season, but the biggest reason for that is they've been missing some receivers with injuries. We will see how healthy they can get for this game. That will be a big factor. If they have true balance, they obviously have a major talent advantage against this team. There's also the case to be made that Oregon is just on a revenge tour after losing their first playoff game last year in a brutal matchup against Ohio State. I still think James Madison is the play here. There is a plus 23.5 out there as I'm speaking right now. That's on a book that I'm not going to give free promo to, but it did just recently open up in the state of Michigan. So there's your hint. Make sure you shop around for the best number. That's the price that I got here. The other first round game involving a group of 5 team is actually a rematch from the regular season. Ole Miss and Tulane. The first meeting did not go well for the Green Wave at all. It was 45-10 in favor of Ole Miss. They really just dominated the stat sheet from start to finish. They held Tulane quarterback Jake Retzloff to just 5 of 17 passing for 56 yards. Ole Miss ran the ball at will for 5.7 yards per carry on offense. They also threw it very effectively. This was one of Chambliss's better games of the season, throwing for over 300 and a pair of scores. I really don't see much changing in this rematch, unfortunately. The line was only 12.5 for Ole Miss at the time, and now it's 16.5. So even though you could maybe say it's hard to beat a team that badly twice, I really don't see it for Tulane. Ole Miss is going to have a slightly different staff in this game. Obviously, no Lane Kiffin, Pete Golding taking over as the head coach, but they kept around more of the staff than was expected, at least to coach the playoffs. And I think that will benefit them. And it's not like the players are all opting out to go over to LSU or anything crazy like that. Tulane has been one of the more fortunate teams all season long. They've squeaked by in a number of games. Their defense has gotten shredded for big plays against most of the better teams that they've played, including giving up 48 to UTSA on the road in the middle of the season. I lean towards Ole Miss at minus 16.5, and I actually think that they should be a bigger favorite than Oregon. So I would kind of flip those two numbers the way that those spreads are, and I think JMU has a much better chance of pulling off an outright upset than Tulane does right here. All right, those are the two games that people probably don't have very high of expectations for in the first round. I'm very much hoping that we get better games than is expected, just for the sake of keeping the group of 5 in this thing in the future, or at least just maintaining their dignity. I'm not opposed to them having their own separate playoff, but you got to keep them involved in the postseason in some way, and I've just seen a lot of hate towards them just because they happen to be taking up spots in this format. But as for the other two games, let's talk Miami and Texas A&M. Had a real potential here for a rematch with Notre Dame, and I believe they would have been favored even on the road in Kyle Field, so that would have been something interesting to see. But as it is, Miami's catching 3.5 here, getting the hook on top of the field goal. However, that's a pretty short line, which basically tells you these two teams are almost dead even on a neutral field. Miami is the one ACC team that has an athletic profile that can really match up against the SEC. Their pass rush is elite. Ruben Bain already has some bulletin board material. Texas A&M offensive lineman out there, clearly not media trained, saying that they don't think he'll be a problem. I think he's going to absolutely wreak havoc here against that A&M protection. That's been the one thing that they've struggled with at times this year, is protecting Marcel Reed. This A&M team is hard to discount, though. They've been able to win games in all different varieties. They've blown teams out. They've come from behind. They've won shootouts. They've won drag-it-out slugfests like a game against Auburn. They can win any way that they need to, but I really believe that Miami defense will be able to keep this very close throughout, so slight lean to them to actually win this game, but my play will more than likely be under 51.5 on the total. A lot of respect for both of these two pass rushes, some of the most elite units in the country. And my favorite play of the first round, the biggest matchup, you could say, number 8 seed Oklahoma, number 9 seed Alabama. This game will be played in Norman, Oklahoma, and they just went to Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama outright, 23-21. However, I think there's a very good reason that Alabama is once again favored, even on the road against the team that they just lost to at home. If you really dig into that first matchup, Oklahoma won, yes, but they were hardly dominant. Alabama led basically every single statistical category across the board. They led in time of possessions, first downs, total yards, pass yards, rush yardage. They had fewer penalties. They were more efficient on third down. The real only reason that they lost was because they lost the turnover margin, 3-0. They threw a first quarter pick six, and turnovers aren't really something that we can predict, but Bama has been one of the best teams all year at taking care of the football, so I would be shocked to see them turn it over 3 times again and not force a single one by their defense, especially how poor Oklahoma's offense has looked in the second half of the year. Ever since John Mateer hurt his hand, that offense has fallen off a cliff. They haven't been able to run all year, very reliant on him either throwing to his receivers or picking up short yardage with his legs. I just don't trust that offense to be able to put up enough points here. I think Bama has a nice matchup still against that OU defense. Even though they struggled with turnovers, they still moved it up and down the field, and their receivers are their biggest strength. Oklahoma's corners have really struggled in matchups against Ole Miss and Tennessee, probably the best receivers that they've faced outside of this Alabama group. Just expecting a much, much better performance from the Tide here after really getting owned at the line of scrimmage by Georgia in the SEC title game. We've seen them in this wounded animal mode one time before. That was after the Florida State game. They turned around and ripped off 8 straight wins, including 4 straight over ranked teams. So still a top 3 talent roster in the sport. Nobody probably wants to back them at the moment, given how bad they looked against Georgia and how many people were rooting for them to miss the playoffs outright. They're going to get it done here in Norman and move on to the second round, where they will face Indiana, and I honestly think they can win that game as well. Indiana's been incredible all year, but we saw last year, I think there's a major advantage to playing a game rather than sitting at home and resting for an extra 2 weeks. It's going to be a big advantage, once again, in my opinion, for those teams that have a game under their belts. So Alabama plus 2,500 to win the national championship, not a terrible value pick. I would also get involved with Georgia if you can find at least plus 600. The numbers vary a ton from book to book right now. They're really struggling to zero in on the odds, so good time to buy in on some national championship futures. The other buy teams, Ohio State, obviously could turn around and go on a similar run as they went on last year. I struggle to see that happening again, though. The offense just doesn't have the same level of explosiveness that they did last year, and they've been way too conservative. So until that changes, I'm going to be somewhat skeptical on Ohio State, even given their elite level of talent. I certainly favor Georgia to beat them if they do face off in the semifinals. We'll have some other thoughts on the bracket when we get closer to that time, and we'll be doing a ton of spaces on Twitter in the meantime. So even though I did just kind of break down all of these games, we will get into them with even more detail, with some extra plays and some props, and get the panel involved with guest speakers over on the space. So be sure to follow me on Twitter at DailyCFB, and check out our live spaces. All right, this was a super long episode. If you made it to this point, I very much appreciate you. This is the final episode of the weekly college football recap podcast. We will be starting up another show on this exact account, talking some college hoops very soon, but I've got some things to work out before I start doing that. So stay tuned for that, but Just want to say one final major thank you to everyone who has listened to this podcast week after week throughout the college football season. It's been a lot of fun to record and get involved with the community, of course, over on Twitter all season long. So I am excited to continue to do this and continue to expand our coverage of college sports. But until the next podcast comes around, enjoy the rest of your day and however long it takes until you hear from me again.